Hello everyone, Lisa here. Today, we're delving into Mark Grayson, aka Invincible, the superhero from the Invincible comics. At 17, he's a high school student, the child of Nolan and Debbie Grayson. Nolan, a former superhero, belongs to the Viltrumates, a powerful alien race. While his father has enhanced abilities, Mark's human mother means he might not inherit them. If you enjoy the content, show your support by liking, commenting, and subscribing. Now let's jump in. Mark Grayson, the offspring of Nolan Grayson, a Viltrumite male, and Debbie Grayson, a human female, was informed at the age of 7 by his father that he hailed from another planet and assumed the role of the superhero Omni-Man. Nolan described the Viltrumites as a virtually peaceful race of supermen, revealing his mission to protect Earth and foretelling that Mark would one day acquire superpowers like him. Eagerly anticipating the development of his powers, Mark's transformation occurred during his senior year in high school, when, while working at his part-time job, he unexpectedly propelled a trash bag through the sky. Following this revelation, Nolan enlisted the help of his friend Art to craft a superhero costume for Mark, who then needed to select a fitting name for his alter ego. After intervening in a bullying incident, Mark found himself in the principal's office receiving commendation tempered with a warning about his vulnerability. Nonetheless, Mark embraced the chosen name and adopted it for his superhero identity. 2 months into possessing his newfound abilities, Mark crossed paths with the Teen Team, a cadre of teenage superheroes including Robot, Duplicate, Rexplode, and Adam Eve. Subsequently, he discovered that Adam Eve was also a fellow student at his school. Further adventures unfolded as Mark joined forces with his father, Omni-Man, to repel an alien invasion orchestrated by the Flaxons. His camaraderie with Eve deepened, and together they confronted a malevolent teacher who was discovered to be placing bombs on students. During Omni-Man's absence, Mark engaged in a face-off with Alan the alien, revealing Alan's true intentions. He was testing the champions of planets rather than being an evil antagonist. Unbeknownst to Omni-Man, who had always perceived Alan as an evil alien, a conversation with Mark enlightened Alan to the fact that he had been mistakenly targeting the wrong planet for 15 years. Realizing his error, Alan departed, leaving Mark to resume his normal life. Shortly thereafter, Mark attended an open house at Upstate University with his close friend William. During their visit, they found themselves under attack by a robotic zombie. Swiftly changing into his superhero costume, Mark skillfully evaded the zombie's lunge, causing it to impale itself on a nearby statue. Mark then returned to William, who, piecing together the situation, discovered Mark's superpowers. William, acting as a trustworthy friend, drove Mark home and assured him that his secret was safe. In the wake of these events, Eve flew into Mark's room, revealing that her boyfriend Rexplode had cheated on her with Duplicate. Distraught, Eve decided to quit the Teen Team, finding solace in Mark's comforting presence until they were interrupted by Mark's mother. Omni-Man soon delivered the shocking news that the Guardians of the Globe, the world's premier superhero team, were all dead. The following day, Mark and William discussed Mark's secret identity at his locker. Their conversation was interrupted by a girl presenting Mark with an envelope. Later, Eve visited Mark, and both she and William engaged in separate conversations with Mark, each carefully avoiding the revelation of his identity to the other. At the funeral for the fallen Guardians of the Globe, attended by various heroes like Savage Dragon, Shadowhawk, and Super Patriot, Sanford, Black Samson's butler, sought revenge. Mark, ensuring the safety of Art, witnessed Omni-Man defeating Sanford. Following a brief conversation with Savage Dragon, Omni-Man departed with Mark. That night, Mark opened the letter from a girl named Amber Bennett, who left her phone number for him. On a Tuesday, William celebrated Mark's birthday at his house. Subsequently, Nolan proposed watching a movie together and relaxing on the couch. The day after, Eve apologized for missing Mark's party, leading Mark and Eve to patrol the city and confront the Villeneuve Lizard League. After a successful defeat, they acknowledged their effective teamwork. However, their conversation was abruptly interrupted by Robot, who hoped to convince them to try out for the Guardians of the Globe. Eve, angered for some reason, left, and Mark followed Robot. The encounter with Rex resulted in a silence between them. After leaving the bathroom, Mark observes a commotion in the crowd, noticing Rex engaging in a fight with a superhero named Monster Girl. Intervening, Mark saves Rex, causing Monster Girl to revert back to her human form. Rex expresses gratitude to Mark, but departs in anger. Robot then announces the new Guardians of the Globe lineup, which includes the former Teen Team members, minus Eve, along with Black Samson and Monster Girl. Despite Robot's invitation, Mark declines to join the team. Returning home, Mark shares dinner with his mom, where she inquires about his homework and questions whether he is dating Amber. Mark assures her that their relationship is nothing more than studying. After dinner, Mark goes to his room with Amber, where they study and share a kiss, unaware that Eve is observing them. Mark encounters Doc Seismic, a villain using wristbands to create earthquakes, who enjoys confronting famous superheroes. During their battle, Doc Seismic seemingly sacrifices himself to evade defeat, prompting Mark to head home. That night, Mark, not in the mood for conversation, dismisses an Omni-Man who approaches him, opting to go back upstairs. The following day, Mark talks with William and visits the comic shop after school. He gets his comic signed by Philip Schaff, the in-comic creator of Science Dog. Afterward, he buys comics, asks the clerk to turn up the news, and learns that his father is battling the Immortal, a member of the Guardians of the Globe who is supposed to be dead. Mark flies to the scene, witnessing his father impale and tear the Immortal's torso in half. Omni-Man sees Mark and requests a conversation. Upon learning that Nolan is responsible for destroying the Guardians, Mark confronts him. Omni-Man reveals that the Viltrumites, far from being peaceful explorers, are in reality violent conquerors. Omni-Man shares the story of raising Mark and urges him to join in taking over the planet. Nolan attempts to persuade Mark by revealing that he will outlive humans, watching everyone he loves pass away. Unconvinced, Mark refuses, leading to a violent confrontation where Nolan punches Mark into buildings, causing the death of thousands of innocent people. The battle continues, with Nolan charging Mark into the subway. Nolan callously reveals his indifference towards Earth, but Mark vehemently disagrees, asserting that Nolan is mistaken. Mark charges at Nolan, who then threatens to kill Mark if he cares so much about Earth. Despite receiving a punch, Mark is swiftly knocked away by Nolan, who continues to brutally assault him, sending Mark to various locations around the planet. During the relentless beating, Nolan lectures Mark on how the Viltrumites would supposedly benefit Earth. When Mark questions the fate of humans who resist takeover, Omni-Man callously discloses that they will die. Frustration mounts as Nolan grows increasingly irritated with Mark's resistance. As Nolan prepares to deliver a fatal blow, he hesitates, prompting a surprising decision to spare Mark before flying into space. Following Omni-Man's betrayal, Mark falls into a coma for almost 2 weeks. Upon waking, he encounters Cecil Steedman, a government agent, who provides him with a job description and asks probing questions. After a full recovery, Cecil visits Mark again, revealing his awareness of Mark's role in protecting the planet. He proposes a collaboration, and Mark accepts, marking the beginning of their new working relationship. Returning home that night, Mark attempts to talk to his mother, but she is too distraught and heads to bed. Subsequently, Mark receives a transmission from Cecil, prompting him to head into space. There, he encounters Alan and is surprised by his presence. Alan warns Mark about a Viltrumite among them. Mark, already aware, reveals his Viltrumite hybrid status and his father's departure from Earth. Sympathetic, Alan shares the tragedy of his own species being eradicated by Viltrumites. Mark offers his assistance to Alan if needed, and they discuss Mark's plans to finish high school. Later, Mark faces the Flaxons once again, with the help of the Guardians of the Globe and Eve. They defeat the aliens by destroying the wristbands that slow down their aging process. Returning home, Mark finds the Immortal levitating near his house. The Immortal warns Mark that he will be closely monitored and vows to intervene if Mark follows in his father's footsteps. At the Burger Mart, Mark, Amber, William, and Eve enjoy a meal together. They share laughs and conversations, providing a brief respite from the challenges they've faced. The camaraderie among the friends becomes evident as they navigate the complexities of their relationships. After the casual outing, Mark heads home. The following day, he assists the Guardians of the Globe in thwarting an alien invasion that results in the destruction of his high school. The chaos forces Mark to confront the impact of his superhero life on his personal and academic responsibilities. The school's destruction leads to the postponement of graduation, affecting Mark's plans for a smooth transition to the next phase of his life. Amidst the rubble, Mark, Amber, and Eve discuss their relationships. Mark, having grown closer to Amber, shares moments of intimacy with her, while also acknowledging the complexities of superhero life. As they clear debris, they encounter Titan, a former supervillain whom Mark had fought in the past. Surprisingly, Titan offers assistance in the cleanup, showcasing potential character growth and a shift in alliances. The next day, Mark and Amber embark on a date, enjoying each other's company. Their connection deepens, and they decide to head to Mark's house. However, upon entering, they find Mark's mother, Debbie, on the couch. The unexpected encounter briefly disrupts the romantic atmosphere. Undeterred, Mark and Amber decide to go outside, where they share a kiss. Amber, expressing caution, leaves, hinting at the complexities and challenges that may arise in their relationship. Later, Mark attends his graduation ceremony. As he goes on stage to receive his diploma, he throws his cap in the air, only to realize he threw it too hard and it doesn't return. The humorous moment adds a touch of levity to the occasion. After graduation, Mark, Amber, William, and Eve gather at the Burger Mart, underscoring the enduring friendships and connections that have evolved through their shared experiences. The unfolding events reflect the intricate balance Mark must maintain between his superhero duties and personal life. Mark's life continues to be a balancing act between his superhero responsibilities and personal relationships. After a brief return to Earth, where he intervenes in a Martian threat and goes on a lunch date with Amber, Mark is once again thrust into action. This time, he teams up with Titan to take down the crime boss, Machine Head. The encounter at Machine Head's headquarters proves to be a challenging battle for Mark. Despite his efforts, he faces defeat at the hands of Battle Beast, a formidable adversary. The arrival of the Guardians of the Globe, including the new member Bulletproof, helps turn the tide of the fight. However, the consequences are severe, with Black Samson and Bulletproof sustaining serious injuries during the confrontation. Returning home, Mark discovers Eve in his room and learns about her decision to quit being a superhero. She expresses that her powers are being underutilized, and she plans to go to Africa to contribute in a more meaningful way. Mark, though initially confused, respects her choice, and they share a heartfelt moment before Eve leaves. Seeking assistance with his costume, Mark visits Art, who suggests creating a new one. Mark then has dinner with his mother, Debbie, and they discuss various topics, including his relationship with Amber. Mark subsequently attends college and encounters new challenges, such as dealing with the appearance of a student named D.A. Sinclair. Amber's frustration grows as Mark, once again, has to leave during their time together to confront a new threat, a Reanimant. The strain on their relationship becomes apparent as Amber confronts Mark for leaving abruptly. The complexity of maintaining a dual life as a superhero and a student takes a toll on Mark's personal connections. Mark's conversation with William about revealing his superhero identity to Amber highlights the internal struggle he faces. Balancing trust, secrecy, and the desire to protect his loved ones becomes an ongoing theme in Mark's journey as Invincible. The following day, Cecil contacts Mark, urging him to go to Midnight City. Upon arrival, Mark seeks out Darkwing and notices lifeless bodies strewn across the floor. It dawns on him that the current Darkwing is the replacement for the original, a former member of the Guardians of the Globe who fell victim to Omni-Man's brutality. To Mark's surprise, Darkwing is also taking lives. A fierce confrontation ensues, resulting in Mark apprehending Darkwing and escorting him to prison. Later, Mark enjoys a movie outing with William and Rick before surprising Amber by entering her room. Amber, astonishingly, deduces Mark's secret identity. Mark then reveals his superhero costume to her and shares the story of his origin. The two spend the night together. Meanwhile, Rick Sheridan falls prey to kidnapping by D.A. Sinclair. Mark visits his mother, disclosing to her that he has divulged his identity to Amber. Art modifies the boots on Mark's costume, marking the introduction of a version that would become his standard attire. Mark subsequently confronts a man named Angstrom Levy, capable of traversing dimensions. Angstrom, with the assistance of Mark's former adversaries, the Mahler twins, attempts to harness the knowledge of alternate dimensional counterparts to benefit humanity. A violent encounter ensues, leading to a plea from Angstrom for Mark's life. A mishap during the confrontation results in an explosion, sparing only Mark, Angstrom, and one of the original Mahler twins. The Guardians arrive post-explosion, assuring Mark that they will handle the aftermath. Later, it is revealed that Winslow has retired as a principal and now serves as the dean of Upstate University. Concerned about Rick's whereabouts, Mark visits Winslow's home and converses with his mother. Their discussion is interrupted by what initially appears to be a seance dog, prompting a skirmish that evolves into a peaceful conversation. The seance dog discloses itself as a mantis-like alien, seeking Mark's assistance. Returning home, Mark finds his mother struggling with alcohol once again. After that, Mark departs, and Cecil attempts to dissuade him from visiting their planet. Mark dismisses Cecil's advice and goes to see Amber. He explains that he must journey into space, and they share a heartfelt embrace before he departs. Accompanied by the alien, they reach his home planet, where the ruler is revealed to be none other than Mark's father. The shock of seeing his father again prompts Mark to clench his fist, prepared for a potential confrontation. Nolan, anticipating a fight, also readies himself. However, instead of engaging in combat, Mark is overcome with emotion and tears, opting to embrace his father. Nolan reciprocates the hug, expressing how much he missed Mark. Despite Mark's pleas for his father to return, Nolan refuses. He shares the story of abandoning his post and discovering Thraxa, where he easily became ruler due to his long lifespan. The two discuss ongoing events, and Mark tests Nolan's authenticity with a punch, suspecting him of being a disguised Thraxan. Nolan, annoyed, prepares to retaliate, but Mark assures him it was merely a test. Acknowledging Mark's strength, they head to Nolan's private chambers. In the chambers, Mark learns that his father has a new alien wife named Andressa. Nolan discloses that he became a fugitive of the Viltrum Empire for Mark's sake. Opening a door, Nolan introduces Mark to his little brother, explaining that the child, despite aging like his mother, is expected to age slowly, like a Viltrumite once his powers manifest. Nolan reveals that the purple skin is a deformity that would have led to the child's demise on Viltrum. He explains that the Thraxans chose their own name, which is why he refers to the child as Mark's little brother. Nolan seeks Mark's assistance because the Viltrumites are aware of his presence, and they are on their way to eliminate him. Soon, they are attacked by 3 Viltrumites. Mark escorts Andressa and her child to the planet's caves, but their escape is interrupted by a Viltrumite named Lucan. Andressa distracts Lucan, allowing Mark to confront the Viltrumite. Although they manage to escape temporarily, the Viltrumite catches up. Nolan intervenes in the nick of time, enabling Mark to flee, albeit exhausted from the strenuous flight. Nolan arrives, disclosing that he successfully defeated the Viltrumite. Together, they escort Andressa and her child back to the safety of the caves. Returning to the population, they discover a devastating scene with many inhabitants killed. Enraged, Nolan directs his anger toward Mark until the arrival of 2 additional Viltrumites. He swiftly engages one in combat, but the tables turn, prompting Mark to intervene. However, Mark is knocked away during the skirmish. Nolan and Mark join forces against the Viltrumite duo, managing to severely injure one of them. Their apparent victory is short-lived as Lucan intervenes, attacking Nolan and breaking his back. Lucan succumbs to his injuries after being disemboweled. The Viltrumite warship arrives, providing medical assistance to everyone, including Mark. Nolan instructs Mark to read his books before being taken away by the Viltrumites. They inform Mark that he has proven himself as a capable Viltrumite and assign him the task of taking over Earth within a 100-year deadline. After healing from his injuries, Mark returns to Andressa, revealing that Nolan has been captured. A month later, he assists the Thraxans in rebuilding their civilization, damaged by the Viltrumites. Andressa, aware of her impending demise due to rapid aging, requests Mark to take Oliver with him. Mark agrees and they head back to Earth. Upon returning to Earth, Mark reunites with his mother, sharing the news of his encounter with his father and Nolan's betrayal of the Viltrum Empire. He discloses the existence of his little brother, leaving his mother shocked. Leaving her with the child, Mark heads to the Pentagon, where Cecil criticizes him for abandoning his duties. Mark defends his actions, emphasizing that the Thraxans would have perished without his intervention. Afterward, he returns to his dorm, changes, and flies to see Amber. Amber confronts Mark, expressing her frustration and questioning the viability of their relationship. Mark simply replies with a resolute "yeah." Following the encounter, Mark visits his mom's house to spend time with her and his little brother. They engage in conversation, and soon Cecil assigns Mark another mission. Mark swiftly takes action, confronting Mastermind, a villain with mind control powers, and hurls a rock at him before returning home. Debbie provides Mark with Eve's contact number, prompting him to call her and receive an invitation to Africa. The following morning, Mark, accompanied by Amber, flies to Eve's property. Upon arrival, Eve welcomes them, and Mark takes the opportunity to push himself to fly faster. During his training, Mark lands on the roof to find Eve. He updates her on recent events, and together, they work to stop a stampede of animals. After completing the task, the trio shares lunch, and Mark receives a call, believing it to be from Cecil. The caller claims Mark's mother is in danger, prompting Mark to rush home. To his shock, Angstrom Levy has taken Mark's mother and brother hostage. Mark pleads for their release, and Angstrom reveals his extensive knowledge about Mark. Angstrom becomes enraged when Mark refers to him dismissively, leading to him striking Mark's mom. In retaliation, Mark charges at Angstrom. Angstrom transports Mark to a dimension inhabited by dinosaurs with anthropomorphic traits. Despite the danger, Mark manages to escape and encounters Spider-Man and the New Avengers. Bonding with Spider-Man's family, Mark discovers common ground with them and joins forces to take down Dr. Octopus. After their victory, Invincible finds a portal leading back to his home dimension, only to discover his mom beaten up. Angstrom then sends Mark to what seems to be the Walking Dead universe, followed by various other universes, including the DC universe. Mark patiently waits until Levy arrives, flying into him upon his arrival. Witnessing his mom's broken arm, Mark breaks a hole in Levy's house, attempting to apprehend him. However, Levy turns the situation around, punching Mark through various dimensions. Threatening to harm Mark's family, Levy's words enrage Mark, leading him to beat Levy to death. In shock, Mark reflects on his actions until a group of Guardians from the future arrives. They reveal they are 15 years ahead, and Robot transmits a frequency to bring Mark back to his reality. Before leaving, Eve confesses her long-standing love for Mark and expresses her devastation when he left. Returning to his reality, Mark rushes to his house, meets Amber, and embraces her before heading to the Pentagon to check on his mother and brother. With only a few bruises and a broken arm, Mark is relieved to find his mother in good health. Subsequently, he engages in a fight with a person named Rampage and then flies to meet Art. Mark shares Eve's love confession with Art, who suggests that Mark make a choice between Amber and Eve. Mark decides on Amber, and they delve into discussions about Nolan's betrayal. Seeking information on beating Viltrumites, Mark asks Art about Nolan's books, and Art provides him with one. Mark reads the story, discovering clues within the book. Meanwhile, Robot transfers his consciousness into a younger cloned body of Rex Splode, revealing that all of his robot shells are merely drones. The following day, Mark heads to his dorm, where William proposes a plan to find Rick. William disguises himself as a homeless person, attracting the attention of kidnappers. After William is kidnapped, Mark attempts a rescue but is attacked by Reanimant. Mark manages to knock out one of their visors, revealing Rick Sheridan as one of the Reanimant. Despite Mark's pleas, Rick remains unresponsive. Mark finds and frees William, and with William's assistance, Rick gains control over his body. Together, they combat other Reanimant. Sinclair, the creator of the Reanimant, tries to escape, but Mark stops him by breaking his jaw. Cecil arrives at the scene and has his men take Rick and William to the Pentagon. Learning that Rick will never be the same and will be mostly machine, Mark becomes frustrated. He takes William and flies him out seeking some rest. Later, he heads to Amber's dorm at Peyton Noble University, where he notices another guy and argues with Amber. Mark leaves to see Cecil, who informs him of Rick's situation. Mark then returns to Amber's dorm, joins her friends for a movie after overhearing negative comments about himself. Subsequently, Mark leaves for Africa to see Eve. They embrace and converse, and unexpectedly, Mark and Eve share a surprising kiss. Mark receives a call from Cecil and brings Eve with him. Cecil sends the Guardian to Mars to stop the Sequids, a Martian slave race united under a human host. Russ Livingston is left stranded on Mars, replaced by a Martian imposter. The Martians destroy their spaceship, and Eve creates a protective bubble for those who can't breathe in space. The Sequids overwhelm the Guardians, attempting to attach to them. Robot transmits a pulse to repel the Sequids, and Eve forms a barrier. However, the barrier breaks when Eve becomes too exhausted to maintain it. Martian Shapesmith uses his elasticity powers to shield Robot. Mark seizes the device, activating it after a brief dispute with the Immortal. The device removes the Sequids from Livingston, saving everyone. Despite the Martian King's decision to execute Shapesmith, the Guardians refuse to let their comrade face such a fate, leading to their escape. Mark returns after destroying a Martian ship, and Eve embraces him. They discuss their recent kissing incident, with Mark uncertain about their relationship. Mark then visits Amber, finding the man she was studying with there again. Consequently, Mark decides to end his relationship with Amber, believing she shouldn't have to cope with his frequent absences. Amber agrees, and they share a final intimate moment. Mark subsequently goes to see Rex after a parade honors him for saving Earth during the Martian conflict. Meanwhile, Rex witnesses the sacrifices of his teammates, Duplicate and Shrinking Ray, against the Lizard League. Mark ventures into space, keeping an eye on astronauts at a moon base. Later, he defeats a giant alongside the Guardians of the Globe and returns home to play catch with Oliver. During their interaction, Oliver unexpectedly reveals his Viltrumite powers. In a conversation with his mother, Debbie, Mark proposes making Oliver his sidekick. But Debbie disapproves. Mark contemplates quitting school, arguing that he's not passing and is earning more money than he would with a college degree. Cecil calls Mark to go to space, where he intervenes in a fight between the Immortal and Alan. The trio heads to Mark's upstate dorm, and Alan requests Mark to visit Telescria. Mark declines but gives Alan Nolan's books to scan, providing him with a detailed account of recent events. Alan departs, and Mark focuses on homework until he is surprised by an unexpected visit from Eve. Eve questions Mark about her feelings for him, revealing that a future version of her informed Mark about her emotions. Uncertain about what he wants, Mark expresses his uncertainty to Eve, who leaves. William enters, and they proceed to class, only for Mark to learn that he has failed the course. Mark has a lunch date with his mother, which is interrupted by the sudden appearance of a Viltrumite woman. They take to the sky together, and she attempts to sway Mark to join the Viltrumite cause, even assisting him in saving people from a monster attack. Despite her efforts, Mark remains steadfast in refusing to align with the Viltrumites. In response, the Viltrumite woman attacks Mark, asserting that it's not up for discussion. Overpowering him easily, she departs, reminding him of his duty to take over the planet. She also mentions that another Viltrumite will check on his progress before flying away. Mark returns to his mother and they head home. Frustrated, he goes back to his dorm and then flies out to clear his mind. Mark makes attempts to enhance his strength, including lifting a 400-ton weight. Later, he joins forces with Rex Splode to thwart a robbery attempted by martial artists Fightmaster and Dropkick. However, their efforts are disrupted by Multipaul, seeking revenge on Rex, whom he blames for his sister's alleged death. Mark assists Rex, unaware that the burglars managed to escape. To everyone's surprise, it is revealed that Kate, Multipaul's sister, survived through a zero copy. She aimed to stop her brother without sending him to prison, but upon arriving, she discovers Mark had already taken care of the situation. Mark notices William wearing his costume, playfully joking about William being gay for donning his superhero attire. Mark later faces Tether Tyrant and Magmaniac once again, with Oliver joining the fight to help defeat them. After the battle, Oliver expresses interest in becoming Mark's sidekick, and Mark agrees to discuss it further in the future. Mark, Rick, and William spend time at the bowling alley, and after Rick shares a somber story about D.A. Sinclair's actions, Mark flies to Africa to see Eve. Cecil sends them to stop Dr. Seismic, but they are overwhelmed and captured. Darkwing 2 and Reanimant arrive to save them, but Mark confronts Darkwing 2, accusing him of being a murderer. Cecil intervenes, and Mark learns that Sinclair now works for Cecil. In the White Room, Cecil unleashes Reanimant, revealing that he knows Mark's weakness, his equilibrium, and has a deadly pulse for Viltrumites. Mark attempts to flee to the Guardians of the Globe headquarters. At the headquarters, the Guardians help Mark. Rex destroys the transmitter, Robot blocks the frequency, and Mark charges into Cecil. Mark threatens to kill Cecil if he recruits Oliver. Several Guardians quit, and Mark heads home, discussing the situation with Eve and expressing his fear for his life. Mark admits that he thought of Eve before he thought he was going to die. Eve grabs his hand and they share a kiss, marking the beginning of their relationship. Mark practices flying with Oliver, who becomes Kid Omni-Man. They head to Art's shop, where Mark gets a new, darker costume. Mark and Oliver fight supervillains to prevent a prison break. Despite Oliver's rookie mistakes, Mark forgives him. Later, Mark hangs out with Eve, and they share another kiss, unaware that they are being watched. The Mauler twins create a new weapon and seemingly take out the Guardians of the Globe. Mark suits up and flies over, with Oliver following him. Invincible fights the Mauler twins, who launch a nuclear missile. Oliver arrives and Mark stops the missile, surviving the explosion. In space, Mark sees that Oliver has killed the Mauler twins and Cecil comforts him. Mark confronts Cecil, choking him and reminding him of their deal. He tells Oliver to get in the sky, emphasizing the value of human life. Oliver disagrees, asking Mark if he ever thought their father was right. Mark, silently contemplating, admits that sometimes he did. The next day, Mark spends quality time with Eve, who suggests that he talk to Oliver about his lack of empathy for humans. Frustrated with Oliver's perspective, Mark goes to William's room, where William reveals that he's moving in with Rick. Mark then goes on patrol and intervenes when he notices Titan attempting to break out Multipaul. Titan leaves after an astral dragon intervenes, and Mark, unable to stop the dragon, heads home. On his way, he encounters Eve coming to see him. They decide to go on uninterrupted dates, and Mark goes to talk to Oliver. Despite initial reluctance, Oliver apologizes, and Mark hugs him, much to Oliver's annoyance. Mark and Eve enjoy a dinner date in Paris, which is interrupted by Fightmaster and Dropkick. They request Mark to accompany them to the future, and though hesitant at first, Mark agrees. In the future, Mark, along with the duo, allows themselves to be captured and is taken to prison. However, Mark is instead brought to the king, who turns out to be the Immortal. The Immortal expresses his desire to die and asks Mark to do it. Initially refusing, Mark loses his temper when the Immortal begins revealing future events and ends up decapitating him. Returning to his current timeline, Mark goes back to Paris with Eve. They explore various locations around Earth and space, declaring their love for each other and sharing a kiss. Back in Mark's room, they take their relationship to a new level and share an intimate moment for the first time. The following morning, Mark receives a call from Amber. Upon arriving, she reveals that her father has passed away, and her new boyfriend, Gary, has been physically abusing her. Mark asks for Gary's location. Meanwhile, Oliver patrols the city and encounters a giant robot wreaking havoc. He is also trailed by a floating orb. Simultaneously, Mark confronts Gary, holding him by his leg and warning him to stay away from Amber. Gary promises to change, and Mark tosses him away, expressing his concern for Amber's safety. Mark then locates Oliver and goes to assist. Oliver reveals that the human inside the destructive robot just wants to be free, and Mark assures they'll discuss it later. Mark visits Amber, who appreciates his actions and decides to give Gary another chance. Later, he shares the day's events with Eve at her house, and they spend some time cuddling. Mark eventually encounters Oliver, apologizing for not teaching him certain things. While Oliver notices a reflection in the trees, Mark attempts to investigate the floating orb. However, it explodes in his hand, and he suspects someone has been watching them. Mark turns to Robot for help in identifying the observer, and later goes to Cecil to inquire if he owns the orb. Cecil denies involvement and seeks Mark's help in tracking down a fugitive who allegedly killed his wife. Despite initial reluctance, Mark agrees. The fugitive, revealed to be the astounding Wolfman, convinces Mark of his innocence, and they head to Cecile. Disagreements arise between Mark and Cecil, leading to the release of Reanimant. Mark and the Wolfman destroy some Reanimant, but realize they are outnumbered. Mark flies them out of the Pentagon, only to be ambushed by members of the Guardians who hadn't quit. The Immortal, Darkwing 2, Duplicate, Shapesmith, and Black Samson. In the ensuing battle, Mark grows weary of holding back and takes decisive action, grabbing the Immortal's head and using it to knock out the other Guardians. After escaping the Guardians' ambush, Mark takes the astounding Wolfman to his estate. Wolfman reveals the murderer as Zechariah, and Mark meets Gary's estate manager and friend Dunford before returning to the Elder Brood. Later, Eve discloses that she started a company in Invincible's name to make money. They share a kiss and cuddle. Mark encounters Powerplex, a costumed hero seeking revenge for his father's battle with Invincible. Mark attempts to capture him, but Powerplex escapes. Next, Mark arrives at a staged kidnapping, where Powerplex accidentally uses his power to kill his wife and son during an attack. Mark subdues him, and later, Powerplex vows to find a way to kill Mark. Later on, Mark is lying on Eve's bed when he receives a call about evil, alternate dimension counterparts attacking the world. He fights one of his counterparts, appearing evenly matched. However, Capes, mistaking him for the evil version, attack him. Mark and Eve later assist Cyberforce in killing another evil counterpart, resulting in Eve getting severely injured. Mark takes her to the hospital, refusing Cecil's plea for help in a crisis caused by his counterparts. Mark, Oliver, and Zandale discover that Angstrom Levy is behind the incidents. Mark attempts to attack him, but Angstrom knocks him back with orbs. In a moment of decision, Mark rips off Angstrom's forearm before he can escape through a portal. 4 days later, Mark witnesses the worldwide carnage caused by his counterparts. He frequently visits Eve in the hospital, and as the superpowered community cleans up after the war, Mark blames himself for the destruction. The public also views him as the cause of the chaos, and Powerplex attacks him during the cleanup, prompting Badrock to intervene and take him into custody. Later, Cecil assembles Mark with Robot, Britt, Black Samson, and Donald Ferguson, explaining that Darkwing and Rex are dead, and the Immortal and Kate have quit to start a family. The need for a new leader of the Guardians of the Globe arises, and Cecil suggests Mark take on the role. However, Mark, still uneasy and distrustful of Cecil, decides to leave. Feeling self-loathing, Mark encounters Conquest, a Viltrumite, who reminds him of his duty to take over Earth. Although somewhat glad to have a physical outlet for his emotions, Mark engages in a brutal battle with Conquest. Buildings shatter as they collide, and the shockwaves from their power cause destruction. Despite Mark's efforts, Conquest proves to be overwhelmingly powerful, bruising Mark's eye and breaking his leg. Oliver tries to intervene, but Mark shoves him away to prevent him from getting killed. Conquest breaks Oliver's arm and attempts to rip him in half. Mark charges into Conquest, who sends him flying across a ship at sea. Meanwhile, Eve wakes up and rushes to Mark's aid. Conquest easily overwhelms Eve, impaling her, and everyone believes she is dead. Conquest thanks Mark for the battle, igniting Mark's anger, and he promises to kill. Despite Mark's broken body and excessive bleeding, his rage allows him to turn the tide of the battle. Eve unlocks her full powers after a near-death experience, recovering from her injuries. She fires a massive energy beam at Conquest, burning all the skin off his body. Mark continues the fight, and in the end, he crushes Conquest's skull with headbutts, apparently killing him. Exhausted and injured, Mark collapses to the ground just as other heroes arrive to help. Mark wakes up in the Pentagon hospital with Eve by his side. They reconcile, and during an intimate moment, their reunion is abruptly interrupted by Debbie Grayson. Later, Invincible joins other heroes at the funeral for Rexplode, where Robot takes on Rex's name. Mark then visits Oliver in the hospital and shares a shocking revelation he had during his fight with Conquest. To truly protect Earth, he believes he must kill every villain he encounters from now on. Invincible, along with the Superhero Committee, continues the reconstruction of cities worldwide. However, he faces a new villain named Dinosaurus, who criticizes Invincible's approach to cleanup, advocating for non-superpowered individuals to handle the task for job creation and economic benefits. In the ensuing fight, Invincible is about to kill Dinosaurus when the Guardians of the Globe, led by Robot, intervene. Robot questions Invincible's intention to kill Dinosaurus. Later, at Eve's house, Mark explains the city incident to Eve, and they have dinner with Eve's parents. After an awkward dinner, Mark and Eve discuss the prison meeting they had earlier. Following the meeting, where Mark agrees not to charge the prison for 3 months, they encounter an older Oliver flying around in a new costume, now calling himself Young Omni-Man. Oliver informs them that there's no one at the house, suggesting they have some fun. Later that night, Mark knocks on the bathroom door, but Eve asks him to go away for some reason. Meanwhile, the Sequids commence their attack, led by Russ Livingston in Texas. Mark answers the call from a nuclear plant and heads off before his mother can tell him what's happening in the city. Mark and Eve face an alien named Universal, who reveals she is on Earth for the planet's energy and will not leave until she gets it. Despite a challenging fight, Invincible manages to obtain her staff, the source of her powers. To his surprise, he finds that he can't wield the staff, and Adam Eve steps in to subdue Universal. Cecil enters the scene and informs Invincible about the return of the Sequids. Invincible joins other heroes to fight the invasion, but the situation appears dire, leading him to make a difficult decision to kill the possessed individuals. Feeling guilt over his actions, he returns home and shares the news with Eve. Later, when Mark meets Eve at his house and suggests dinner, they are interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Mark's father, Nolan, accompanied by Alan. Nolan informs Mark that he is needed, as a time of war is upon them. Later, Mark confides in Eve, sharing the events that have unfolded and his fears about the impending war with the Viltrumites. He expresses concern about the potential impact the war might have on him. Amidst a Flaxan invasion, Eve urgently calls Invincible to rush to a shopping mall. However, Mark, preoccupied with the invasion, declines and suggests that Oliver might be able to handle it. Mark and Oliver later discuss whether Oliver should join them in space. Oliver is persistent, emphasizing that he might be of help. Eventually, their father, Nolan, agrees to bring Oliver along. Before leaving, they have an emotional farewell with Eve. Accompanied by his father, brother, and tech jacket, Mark heads to space with Alan to meet the coalition of planets. However, they are attacked by Conquest, Lucan, and an unnamed Viltrumite. In the midst of the battle, Oliver runs out of breath and Mark instructs him to find the nearest planet for air. Conquest follows Oliver, and a fierce fight ensues. Mark intervenes just in time, allowing Oliver to catch his breath. After a challenging battle, Mark manages to kill Conquest but is left on the brink of death. Omni-Man and Oliver find Mark, and Omni-Man assures Oliver that Mark will recover, but it will take a few months. As the Viltrumite War begins, Mark regains consciousness after several months and learns from his father that he was the one who killed Conquest. They all set out to aid in thwarting a Viltrumite assault on Telescria. It is unveiled that a traitor lurks within the coalition during the encounter. Following an attack by the Viltrumites, Thaddeus rallies everyone to prepare for the confrontation with the Viltrumites on their home planet Viltrum. Journeying into space, they eventually reach the Viltrumite planet. Thaddeus faces an attack from the female Viltrumite Thula, but Battle Beast, who has transitioned from being Machine Head's bodyguard to a formidable anti-Viltrumite warrior, intervenes and initiates a battle. Emperor Thrag arrives with additional Viltrumites, and at that moment, Space Racer appears with Ragnars, creatures capable of combating the Viltrumites. Mark and Oliver engage in combat with some Viltrumites until Mark confronts Thrag, only to be pushed aside. Oliver insults Thrag and attempts to strike him, but Thrag retaliates by breaking Oliver's jaw and tearing off his arm. This incites Invincible's anger, leading him to confront Thrag, only to be struck back. Together with his father and Thaddeus, the trio charges towards the center of the Viltrumite planet, aided by a blast from the Space Racer resulting in the planet's explosion. In the aftermath of the shockwave, Mark searches for Oliver's body, grieving at the prospect of Oliver's demise. Following Thaddeus's death, Thrag targets Mark, overpowering him and inflicting severe injuries. Omni-Man intervenes but is also overpowered. Battle Beast attempts to intervene but is thrown aside. Thrag continues to assault Mark, and Omni-Man kicks Thrag's hands off Mark, enabling Mark to escape temporarily. However, Thrag catches up, delivering a powerful blow to Mark's face and grabbing him by the neck. Thrag impales Omni-Man but chooses not to kill Mark and Nolan for unknown reasons. They are later rescued by a coalition ship and return to Telescria. Upon waking up in Telescria, Mark finds Alan watching over him. Alan reveals himself as the new leader of the coalition of planets after Thaddeus's demise. Mark learns that he was unconscious for 2 weeks and is shown to his father. Oliver is recovering with a new mechanical jaw and arm after the injuries inflicted by Thrag. He proceeds to discuss Oliver's condition with his father and learns that Oliver should be out of a coma in a few days. When Alan receives a report from Tech Jacket on previously Viltrumite-occupied planets, he becomes anxious. Despite Alan's earlier assurance that there was no Viltrumite activity, Mark points out that the Viltrumites wouldn't have spared him if they didn't intend to harm him. Putting the pieces together, Mark realizes that the Viltrumites are on Earth. Concerned about the situation on Earth, Mark and Omni-Man head there, contemplating the potential consequences of Viltrumite actions. As they approach Earth, Mark fails to spot any Viltrumites while flying across the planet. Omni-Man attempts to comfort his son, but their moment is awkwardly interrupted by Tech Jacket. After Tech Jacket leaves, Mark disembarks from the ship to fly to Earth when it gets closer. While flying over Earth, he doesn't encounter any Viltrumites. Omni-Man asks Mark to look over, and suddenly Thrag appears before them. Mark attacks Thrag, who effortlessly grabs his neck and throws him. Thrag then attempts to negotiate with Mark, expressing a desire for a truce due to the limited number of pure-blooded Viltrumites left in the universe. Thrag reveals his plan for the Viltrumites to occupy Earth while blending in with humans to interbreed, considering Earth's suitability for replenishing their ranks due to the similarity of human DNA to Viltrumites. Mark rebuffs the proposal, asserting that the Viltrumites will only grow stronger with time. Thrag warns of catastrophic losses if they fight today, and despite Mark's fury, he reluctantly agrees, contemplating the potential consequences of refusing. Thrag commends Mark, stating that he and Nolan may be instrumental in the resurgence of the Viltrum Empire. Tech Jacket arrives at the scene, only to learn that the war is over. Mark flies to his house with his father to surprise his mother, who greets him with a warm hug. When asked about Oliver, Omni-Man assures that he is injured, but alive. Debbie directs Mark to visit Eve, and he flies to her house, opening her window. Tearfully, Eve warns him not to come closer due to her weight gain over the past 10 months. Nevertheless, Mark embraces her, expressing his love. They discuss the events that unfolded during their absence, and Eve informs Mark that he has been managing the Invincible business using Bulletproof. The next day, Mark takes to the skies, asserting that although the war may be over, victory remains elusive. Later, he visits Art at the tailor shop, requesting his old costume. Returning to the Wilkins residence, he meets with Eve, and as they engage in conversation, Invincible business interrupts. Mark reports and confronts several of his past villains. Returning home, he finds Eve talking with his mom, Samantha. Confused, Mark discovers that Samantha thought he had finished a bank job and popped in to visit his mom during his absence. Mark leaves to find his father, and then he and Adam Eve visit the House of Duplicate and the Immortal, who were married years ago. They enjoy a cheerful welcome and dinner with the group, exchanging stories. After the meal, Eve helps Kate with her twins. Witnessing the happiness of the babies, Eve runs out of the house in tears, and Mark follows her. He learns that Eve had an abortion during his absence, and he is shocked at the revelation of her pregnancy. Mark cries, embraces her, and apologizes for leaving her alone. Returning to his house, Mark finds his parents back together after the events of Omni-Man abandoning his post. They inform him of their plans to go to Telescria to see Oliver and work on their relationship. As the spaceship departs, Mark and Eve have a conversation outside. Later, they climb into Mark's bed, but the details of that night remain undiscussed as they go back to sleep. Mark visits his old friend William at Upstate University, discovering that William is homosexual. Mark is initially confused but supportive. Later, Mark attempts to stop Dinosaurus again, but fails, resulting in the transformation of Las Vegas into glass by hydrogen bombs, with numerous lives lost. Reflecting on his failure, Mark wallows in sorrow for not being able to prevent the tragedy. Later, Mark and Eve team up to thwart a bank robbery. Following the event, Powerplex attempts to confront Mark, but Mark skillfully uses his words to calm him down. Powerplex breaks down in tears upon realizing that he inadvertently caused the death of his own wife and son. Mark provides comfort, and after a conversation with Cecil, Powerplex heads home. Returning home, Mark discusses with Eve how things seem to be worsening. Mark then visits Universal in prison and successfully negotiates her release. Grateful, Universal obtains energy for her planet and expresses her thanks before returning home. Cecil later reveals to Mark that Sinclair has been reanimating deceased Invincible counterparts. Surprisingly, Mark is okay with this decision, leading him to leave the White Room and attend Monster Girl and Robot's returning party, celebrating their time stranded in the Flaxen dimension. Mark observes tensions between Monster Girl and Rex during the festivities. The next day, Mark sets out to stop Tether Tyrant, only to find that the Guardians have already handled the situation. Mark then visits the former site of Las Vegas, now a large solar panel, and learns from Cecil that something positive emerged from the catastrophe, making Mark reconsider Dinosaurus's perspective. Seeking reassurance, Mark talks to Eve about whether she would still love him if he were to take impulsive actions. Eve offers comfort, prompting Mark to break Dinosaurus out of the Pentagon. Faced with a wave of reanimants, Mark easily escapes with Dinosaurus, and they plan their next move in Dinosaurus's secret base. However, their plans are disrupted when Omnipotus returns and defeats the Guardians. Mark and Dinosaurus rush to the scene, where Dinosaurus ultimately crushes Omnipotus's head. The Guardians attempt to apprehend Dinosaurus and Mark after the conflict with Omnipotus, but they manage to escape. Mark returns home, and Eve realizes the actions he took. Cecil interrupts and requests a conversation with Mark, expressing his admiration but emphasizing that Mark has taken a wrong turn. Interrupted by a transmission, Cecil instructs Mark to go to space and meet with Alan. In space, Mark finds Oliver with Alan but notices the absence of his father. Alan reveals his plan to release the Scourge virus into the atmosphere, enraging Mark. He questions the similarity of this plan to what the Viltrumites did to the Unipans. He questions the similarity of this plan to what the Viltrumites did to the Unipans, and although Alan provides an explanation, Mark remains unconvinced. A battle ensues, and to everyone's shock, Thrag interrupts to assist Mark, startling Alan. Thrag reveals that he is aware of their plan, and Alan, reaching for the virus dispenser, is warned by Thrag that he could kill him before the virus takes effect. Thrag proposes a truce, reluctantly accepted by Alan. Before they can continue their conversation, the Guardians appear, attempting to capture Mark without success. Meanwhile, Oliver seizes the opportunity to grab the virus dispenser. Mark notices Oliver heading to Earth and tries to stop him. A brief scuffle and argument ensue, with Oliver arguing that the human loss is preferable to the loss across the galaxy. In a tug of war, Oliver accidentally dispenses the virus into Mark's face. Alan rushes to catch him, reassuring Mark that the virus is meant to spread from person to person. Initially feeling okay, Mark notices bleeding from his eyes and nose, causing concern for Alan. Later, Mark finds himself quarantined in the Viltrumite warship until Thrag attempts to kill him. Dinosaurus intervenes, sacrificing himself to save Mark by using an escape pod. Mark wakes up, grateful that Dinosaurus saved him, and realizes Dinosaurus has pure intelligence but lacks empathy for humans, drawing a comparison to Oliver. Mark also learns about Thrag's attempt on his life. Bulletproof arrives to rescue Mark, thinking he was kidnapped by Dinosaurus, with Eve revealing she sent Bulletproof. Oliver and Alan join the scene, attempting to fight Dinosaurus. In an attempt to stop the assault, Mark punches Alan, breaking his own arm and realizing the Scourge virus has weakened him, possibly causing a loss of powers. Mark undergoes surgery at the Pentagon, where Cecil explains the virus weakened his invulnerability, and there's uncertainty about regaining his powers. Mark acknowledges it will take time to adapt. Feeling helpless and unable to be invincible, Mark goes home, noting the potential permanence of his power loss. During a Flaxan invasion of London, Mark asks Eve if she can go, but she refuses, citing his lack of protection. Later, frustrated by the news of the intense battle, Mark displaces his frustration onto Oliver and Alan, apologizing after they explain their reasons. Oliver apologizes to Mark for infecting him, and they share a hug. Eve bids farewell to the duo, then proposes intimacy with Mark, who agrees despite the difference in his powers. Afterward, feeling worthless without his powers, Mark and Eve share an intimate moment. To Mark's surprise, he discovers his powers have returned. Mark discusses Bulletproof's involvement in Invincible business, allowing him to keep the costume. Mark flies off to Dinosaurus's base in another costume, where Dinosaurus explains his plan to counteract global warming and famine, but reveals a bomb in Los Angeles. Mark rushes to Los Angeles, calling Cecil for Guardian assistance in locating the bombs. After the Guardians arrive, Dinosaurus engages in a brief argument with Mark, mocking him for prioritizing Los Angeles over the larger global population. He reveals that the Los Angeles bomb was a distraction and detonates another bomb in Greenland, causing flooding in major cities worldwide. Enraged, Mark grabs Dinosaurus and crashes him into the ground. Despite Dinosaurus attempting to reason with him, Mark continues the assault until Dinosaurus launches him. Dinosaurus tries to convey the bigger picture, but Mark insists on his perspective and declares that Dinosaurus must die. Dinosaurus seemingly kills Mark, smashing his head and dismembering him for the world to witness. However, it is revealed that Dinosaurus put Mark in a coma and killed a depowered, hastily made clone. Mark explains the consequences of Dinosaurus's actions, making him realize his mistakes. Dinosaurus asks Mark for help, but Mark refuses. Dinosaurus, seeking atonement, requests Mark to kill him. Mark leaves Dinosaurus's base with blood on his clothes, indicating Dinosaurus's death. Cecil arrives, revealing the casualty rate, and Mark asks to see Eve before heading to prison. Instead, Cecil offers Mark a chance to work for him again, providing him with an earpiece. Mark returns home to find his parents relieved to hear he's not dead. Mark and Eve discuss in private on his roof, where Mark admits to working for Cecil, again acknowledging his past recklessness. During the conversation, Eve reveals that she is pregnant. Mark, initially shocked, assures her that he will support whatever decision she makes. Eve decides to keep the child, and Mark, thrilled to become a father, embraces her. They discover Nolan and Deborah kissing each other. The next day, Mark and Eve assist the Guardians in clearing debris. Robot questions Mark's presence due to his supposed death and sends drones to attack him until Cecil intervenes, taking Mark to the Pentagon. Cecil apologizes, and Mark informs him of Nolan's return and his impending fatherhood. Mark requests Cecil to confirm Dinosaurus's death, similar to what was done with Conquest's corpse. Cecil provides the corpse, and Mark identifies it as genuine due to a special marking. Returning home, Mark asks superhero consultant Sherry to check on Eve's fetus. Reluctantly agreeing, Eve allows Sherry to use her X-ray vision, revealing the fetus is fine. However, Sherry advises Eve not to use her powers to prevent harm to the fetus. Mark attends his father's inauguration as Emperor of Viltrum after Thrag's exile, and the revelation that Nolan's father was the original Viltrumite Emperor, Lord Argal. He informs Eve about it and, inspired, she uses her powers to create a ring. Before Mark can propose, Eve says she will marry him. After they have sex, Eve worries that making the ring may have harmed the fetus. Mark calls Sherry, who reassures them that the fetus is alive, but cautions Eve against using her powers, as the energy burned could affect the fetus. While Eve is away, Mark battles Mahler again, believing him to be dead. After defeating Mahler with the Guardians, Mark returns home to find Angstrom Levy has taken Eve hostage. Sent to the same dimension where Mark supposedly killed Levy, Mark watches in shock as an alternate version of himself resorts to cannibalism to survive. Attempting to reason with the sinister alternate, Mark fails, but another version, Mohawk Mark, arrives to assist. Together, they defeat the cannibalistic alternate Mark. Mark returns to his reality, followed by Mohawk Mark. Levy reveals he had a change of heart after talking to Eve, and many versions of Mark are evil. Mark asks Rex to scan for the frequency of the alternate dimension, hoping to discover what happened to Levy. The following day, Mark stops a burglary and asks Robot to keep him updated on the Levy situation. Returning home, he notices that Eve is converting his old room into a space for their child. His father pays him a visit, and together they head to the moon. Nolan shares that he has exiled Thrag and expresses increased concern for his family. Mark discloses that Eve is pregnant with his child. Mark and Eve visit the moon base, now home to Mark's parents. During dinner, Eve accidentally reveals her pregnancy to Nolan, leading Mark to boast about his newfound strength. Mark and Nolan engage in an arm wrestling match, with Mark holding his own until he notices Anissa observing from outside. Later, Mark confronts a Magmanite invasion led by Dr. Seismic and Volcanica. Attempting to kill the giant monster, Mark is interrupted by Dr. Seismic and narrowly avoids being incinerated. Anissa intervenes and kills the monster. Mark confronts her, questioning her motives after observing her watching his arm wrestling match with Nolan. Anissa kisses Mark, leaving him confused, before flying away. Returning home, Eve pleads with Mark not to pursue Angstrom. That night, Mark receives a call from Robot, who has found a way to access the alternate dimension where Angstrom is located. Mark and Eve travel to the space station where Rex is located. After a brief argument with Eve, Mark and Robot venture into the alternate dimension to find Angstrom. On their way to the alternate Earth, they encounter an alternate version of Conquest, who demands their compliance or threatens to kill them. They agree and proceed to the Pentagon, where they meet the alternate reality Mark, who has taken Angstrom captive. This alternate Mark reveals that he is torturing Angstrom to force him to expand the Viltrum Empire. Mohawk Mark, another alternate version, states that Mark is one of the few good Marks. Suddenly, Robot activates a pulse, causing intense pain to Mark and Mohawk Mark, the same pulse previously used on Mark. Robot kills the scientist and eliminates Mohawk Mark by firing a grenade into his mouth. To prevent Mark's return, Robot kills Angstrom. Robot informs Mark that he doesn't want to kill him, but decides to leave him stranded in the alternate dimension. Witnessing the chaos and an alternate version of Craig approaching, Mark comes up with a plan. He switches costumes with the dead Mohawk Mark and rips out his hair to resemble him. Mark lies to Craig, claiming to be Mohawk Mark and asking him to handle the Emperor's duties until he figures out a way to return. Mark then heads to the Teen Team base to find an alternate version of Robot. Initially, the alternate Robot threatens Mark, but Mark talks him down, explaining that he is from another reality seeking help. Alternate Robot reveals that, in his reality, Mark killed Eve. Despite this revelation, Mark convinces Robot to enter a lab and assist in finding a way back home. Reluctantly, Robot agrees to help, despite the potential risks to his own life. Mark searches for the surviving Mahler twin, explaining his situation and asking for assistance. Despite their initial confrontation, Mahler agrees to help, and they begin building a cloning machine to create a new Mark to cover for Robot, and Mahler aiding him. Months later, the cloning project is completed and the process begins. The Viltrumites unleash an alternate version of Monster Girl, who is now physiologically an infant, but transforms into an even larger monster. Robot quickly transfers himself into Mark's cloned body, and Mark heads back home. Returning to the old Teen Team base, Mark flies back to his house, relieved to see Eve alive. Mark inquires about Robot's whereabouts and what he told Eve. Eve reveals that Robot claimed Mark was dead. When Mark asks if she knows where Robot is, Eve remains silent. Concerned about Eve's well-being, Mark learns that she almost lost their child, and his absence for 6 months led to her not eating. Eve, unconvinced by Mark's explanations about Robot, expresses that raising the child without him might be the best option. Mark notices that Eve isn't wearing her ring, and she explains that she cannot allow a child to grow up without knowing if or when its father will return. Attempting to explain the situation further, Mark is met with resistance from Eve, who declares their relationship over due to his unreliability. Mark, devastated, begins to cry. Eve explains that she cannot trust him, and Mark asks her to leave so she cannot be found by Robot. Flying out of his house, Mark continues crying, declaring his love for Eve. His emotional moment is interrupted by the sudden appearance of Anissa. Anissa inquires about Mark's whereabouts, but he is not in the mood to talk. Anissa informs Mark about the Viltrumite mission and her struggle to fulfill her part. Mark attempts to leave, but Anissa stops him, stating that she refuses to mate with humans but is willing to settle for Mark due to his Viltrumite DNA. Mark rejects her advances, flying away. Anissa, unwilling to delay the mission any longer, stops Mark by attacking him. Despite Mark's reluctance to fight, Anissa insists that she cannot stall the mission any further. Anissa attempts to seduce Mark, but he refuses. Losing her patience, Anissa headbutts Mark and continues to assault him. Mark asks her to leave him alone, but she ignores him. Mark attacks Anissa, hoping to sway her away. However, she is enjoying their conflict. Anissa catches Mark's next punch, complementing his strength. Anissa uses her superior strength, and they land on an unknown farm with Anissa on top of Mark. She holds Mark's arms back, demanding that he stop resisting. Mark attacks her, demanding that she leave him alone. Anissa puts her elbow on his neck, saying that she doesn't care. Mark attempts to push Anissa off of him, but is unable to. Anissa tears off both of their costumes. Anissa then rapes Mark, and traumatized by the event, Mark begins to cry. Anissa demands that Mark man up and says that it probably takes a few more times, implying she will come back. She flies away, leaving a traumatized Mark to reflect. Mark then receives some clothes from a farmer and flies off to the Pentagon. Mark approaches Cecil to inquire about Robot's location. Cecil admits they don't know, and questions Mark. Soon, Robot arrives and attempts to lie to Cecil, claiming that Mark was killed. Cecil sees through the deception, and Robot transmits a pulse to temporarily depower Mark. In a brutal turn of events, Robot slits Cecil's throat and crushes his skull. Despite the pain, Mark manages to destroy Robot's drone. Robot then instructs Mark to come to his house. Mark flies there and notices Robot's new drone with Eve. When Mark attempts to attack, he is blocked by another pulse. Mark strikes Robot, hurting himself in the process. Robot, using a latch, dismembers Eve's leg. Mark bandages her leg, and Robot fires a grenade. Mark escapes just in time to save Eve. After destroying Robot's drone, Eve creates a force field to protect herself from the vacuum of space, and the two head to the Viltrumite warship. Worried about their baby, Eve becomes unconscious. Mark seeks his father's help, and Eve undergoes surgery. Meanwhile, Rex kills multiple superhumans and takes over the world. Mark falls asleep and wakes up to Sherry holding his newborn daughter. Overwhelmed with emotion, Mark grabs his daughter and holds her, crying. Sherry informs Mark that Eve won't have a human leg anymore. Despite this, Mark expresses his happiness that she is alive. After Eve's surgery, Mark visits her, and she asks to hold their child. Mark then speaks with his father, Nolan, and learns that Monster Girl is undergoing surgery after an attempt to fight Robot. Their conversation is interrupted by Anissa reporting to Nolan about Robot's drone. Mark is visibly shaken at her presence, and she whispers to him that she missed him. Despite Mark offering to help his father fight Rex, Nolan suggests that he tends to Eve. Meanwhile, Eve, having lost weight immediately after childbirth, uses her powers to rebuild Mark's invincible costume and encourages him to save the world. Mark rushes towards Robot's drone, but hesitates, questioning why the Viltrumites aren't attacking it. Anissa offers to help him up, but Mark rejects her assistance. Nolan intervenes and informs Mark that the Viltrumites have negotiated with Rex. Mark heads to the Pentagon to confront Rex in person. Rex attempts to reason with Mark for an extended period. Eventually, Rex manages to get through to Mark, who decides to head back to the moon. He informs Eve that Rex has effectively won. Later, Mark takes Eve to her parents' house, where they have dinner and meet Eve's daughter. The following day, Mark and Eve attend funerals for Black Samson, Knockout, Kid Thor, and Cecil. Mark then flies into the sky but is interrupted by the Immortal, who asks for Mark's help in stopping Rex. Mark, however, believes that Rex is doing the right thing logically, even if it seems evil. The Immortal points out that the world doesn't make sense, and it needs to stay that way. Touched by his words, Mark asks his father for help again, but Nolan refuses once more. Mark notices Anissa behind him, grabs her throat, and warns her to back off. Anissa, seemingly enjoying the confrontation, hints at wanting to accelerate their next encounter. Mark releases her and returns to his house, where he starts to daydream. However, Eve brings him back to reality. Mark realizes that he can't stand aside and let Rex take over. But being a father now, he suggests leaving Earth so their child won't lose their father. Mark heads to the comic stores and buys some comics for the last time. He notices Amber Bennett, happy with another man, and although he smiles and leaves, he encounters Rampage attacking. Mark saves the people in the vicinity, and Rex's drones intervene. Rex attempts to reason with Mark, asking him to work together, but Mark flies off and unexpectedly encounters D.A. Sinclair. Sinclair informs Mark that Rex isn't popular with the Global Defense Agency, suggesting they might be able to fight against Rex. Mark then goes to a safe house to meet the Immortal and Duplicate. An argument ensues as they believe Mark and Eve were aiding Rex. Mark and Eve leave to see a movie with William and Rick. Later that night, Eve attempts to seduce Mark, but he refuses, still feeling guilty over what happened with Anissa. The following day, Mark has a meal with Art and Nolan, saying his goodbyes to Nolan before heading to the moon to see his mother. Mark bids farewell to his mom and, with Eve and Tara, travels to Telescria. There, they are welcomed by Alan, who is accompanied by 2 bodyguards. Alan notices Tara's cuteness, but she unexpectedly punches him in the eye. Alan's bodyguards attempt to intervene and Eve puts up a force field, but Alan stops his men from attacking first. Alan, realizing his duty, leaves, mentioning that someone else wants to meet them. Oliver arrives with a new appearance and is much older. They are happy to see each other and Oliver offers to cook dinner with his girlfriend. Alan leads Eve, Mark, and Tara to their new house and then leaves to attend to his duties. While Eve changes Tara's diaper, Mark asks her where to put Tara's clothes. Later, the two fall asleep with Tara. Eve wakes up to put Tara in her crib and attempts to get intimate with Mark. However, Mark panics and flies into a wall. Eve questions if something is wrong, and their intimate moment is interrupted by the arrival of Oliver and his girlfriend, Haluma. They bring groceries, and Eve directs them to the kitchen. Mark and Oliver have a conversation about Haluma's appearance, with Mark expressing happiness for Oliver. The four sit down for dinner, and Oliver encourages Mark to try the food. Mark takes a bite and is pleasantly surprised at how much he enjoys it. After dinner, a tired Mark falls asleep on the couch. The next morning, Mark goes to the bathroom to deal with the aftermath of what he ate. Eve knocks on the door and asks if he's okay. Mark tries to flush but struggles. Eve comes in, thinking he broke something, and finds a button to flush it down. Mark goes to a window and Eve joins him. They hold hands and share a kiss. As they become intimate, Mark starts to cry, and a concerned Eve wants to know what's wrong. Mark finally reveals that Anissa raped him, and it happened after Eve broke up with him. Eve tries to comfort him, but Mark pushes her away, admitting that he blames himself for not stopping it. Mark reflects on the situation, and Eve, emotionally affected, begins to cry. Suddenly, they realize that Tara has stopped breathing. Panicking, Mark and Eve rush her to a nearby hospital. At the hospital, they are asked to sign paperwork, and the doctor, upon scanning Tara, questions her species. Eve explains that she is a human Viltrumite hybrid, which makes the doctor hesitant to provide treatment. Mark insists that they treat her like they would anyone else, and the doctor reluctantly agrees, asking them to wait outside. They wait anxiously in the hospital lobby, and Oliver arrives with Haluma. Mark, still agitated, blames Haluma's food for Tara's condition. A heated discussion ensues about the source of Tara's illness, and Mark breaks down in grief at the thought of losing her. Eve emerges from the emergency room and brings the relieving news that Tara is fine. The doctor explains that the food she ingested caused oxidation, and since Viltrumites can hold their breath for an extended period, Tara didn't need to breathe. However, not breathing caused a lack of oxygen to her brain. Mark goes to Alan's office, and Alan questions if Mark's superhero duties are over. Mark confirms it, and Alan suggests that Mark make some form of payment for staying with the Coalition. While Alan would let him stay for free if it were up to him, he offers Mark a job as a spy for the Coalition. Mark is initially hesitant, but eventually accepts the offer. When he returns home, Eve informs him that she must eat gelidarian food for Tara's health since it is close to human food. After cleaning and eating, Eve finally addresses the Anissa situation. She asks Mark not to blame himself and reassures him that they will work through it together. Eve attempts to kiss Mark, but he hesitates. Later, there's a knock on the door, and Alan arrives, revealing that he doesn't believe Battle Beast will win against Thrag, and asks Mark to finish Thrag off while he's weakened. Mark and Oliver examine the aftermath of the battle between Thrag and Battle Beast on Thraxa, but can't find either of them. A local informs them that Battle Beast's flesh was burned in a massive celebration. They return to their ship and discover Thresher and Space Racer floating in a debris field in space. The two receive medical attention, and Thresher, in a fit of rage over Battle Beast's death, attacks the ship's crew but is eventually subdued. Mark returns home and discusses recent events with Eve. As they get ready for bed, Eve expresses her desire for more than just sleep. Mark, unsure but willing to try, agrees. One night, Mark is awakened by Tara's cries, and he takes care of her, engaging in fatherly activities like feeding, playing, and reading to her. Mark expresses his love for Tara, considering her the best thing that has ever happened to him. Confused and intrigued, the teen team interrogates Mark about his knowledge and how he suddenly appeared in their lives. Mark, trying to make sense of the situation himself, explains the strange occurrence in the cave and the flash of light. The teen team decides to investigate the cave, and Mark accompanies them. As they reach the cave, they discover the glowing creature, and Mark hesitates before touching it again. Another flash of light envelops Mark, and he finds himself back in the present time on Telescria. The experience leaves him disoriented and puzzled. He shares the bizarre incident with Eve and Oliver, and they are equally perplexed. Despite the unusual events, Mark continues to adapt to life on Telescria, spending time with his family and navigating the challenges of being a new father. One day, while Mark is out with Eve and Tara, they encounter an alien girl struggling with her coatha. Mark, using his powers, helps retrieve the coatha from a tree. The girl eats the coatha alive, highlighting the unique aspects of life on Telescria. Mark hopes for Thrag's demise, unaware of the Viltrumites' actual condition. In the following weeks, Mark and Oliver take on a job for the Coalition, dealing with an illegal Canslock farm and facing a formidable creature called a Rhinox. Despite these challenges, they continue their efforts to maintain peace and order in the galaxy. However, the mystery of Mark's time-traveling experience remains unsolved, adding an element of uncertainty to his life on Telescria. Mark's emotional turmoil intensifies as he grapples with the consequences of the time travel experience. The knowledge of the lives he could have saved weighs heavily on him, and he finds solace in being reunited with Tara. However, the passage of 5 years in his absence means he missed crucial moments in Tara's life. The mysterious entity presents Mark with a choice between staying in the alternate timeline where he could continue saving countless lives or returning home to be with Tara. Despite the magnitude of the decision, Mark chooses to return to his original timeline, driven by his love for Tara and the desire to be present in her life. Upon his return, Mark discovers the significant changes that occurred during his absence on Telescria. Tara has grown from a toddler into a small child, and Mark is overwhelmed with regret for the lost time. His tearful reunion with Tara and a comforting embrace from Eve highlight the emotional toll on Mark. The emotional depth is further emphasized when Mark confronts Alan, refusing to assist in the ongoing conflict with Thrag. The party at Alan's house becomes a backdrop for Mark's introspection, and Oliver becomes a source of comfort during this challenging period. Mark's tears reflect the complex emotions he experiences, underscoring the profound impact of the choices he made. The narrative skillfully weaves together elements of regret, sacrifice, and the enduring love Mark has for his family, creating a poignant and introspective storyline. The following day, Mark and Eve embark on a vacation, with Mark feeling elated to have his family reunited. Upon reaching their destination, Eve discloses to Mark that she had been involved with someone else during his absence. In their conversation about it, Mark expresses his understanding. Subsequently, Mark attempts to take Tara for a flight, but she becomes frightened. Later on, Mark reads a story to Tara. As they unwind throughout the day, Mark and Eve ponder the events on Earth, as there has been no communication from Nolan for a considerable time. They later visit Alan in the hospital after his failed assassination attempt. Subsequently, Mark, Eve, and Tara visit Nolan and Debbie on the moon, where Mark discovers that Nolan and Rex have formed a friendship. Anissa, upon hearing of Mark's return, tries to engage with him but is thwarted by Eve and dismissed by Nolan. In a private conversation with Mark, Nolan attempts to convince him that Rex's leadership is beneficial, but Mark remains unconvinced. After bidding farewell to his parents on the moon, Mark and his family depart. Reflecting on the peculiarities of his life, Mark apologizes to Eve for any misunderstanding, even though she insists on taking responsibility for her actions. Upon returning to their new home planet, Mark suggests to Eve the idea of hiding out there indefinitely. Suddenly, the tranquility is shattered as Mark and his family are attacked by Onian and Ursal, two of Thrag's new Thrax and Viltrumite children. the sole documented Viltrumite twins. Faced with a threat to Terra, Mark engages Onayan, while Eve swiftly escapes with their daughter. Observing Ursal attacking them, Mark takes down Onayan and rushes to confront Ursal. Eve persuades Mark to take Terra, given his ability to fly faster. Mark urges Terra to be brave as they speed away from Onan. However, Terra begins to struggle to breathe, compelling Mark to slow down and confront Onan in a battle. Onan successfully seizes Terra from Mark, causing him to drop her out of sight. Breaking away from Onan, Mark discovers Eve engaged in combat with Ursal. Mark intervenes by knocking Ursal to the ground, prompting Eve to inform him that she believes Terra is still alive. They successfully capture Onan and find Terra next to Oliver's lifeless body, the result of Thrag's lethal actions. Mark pleads with Thrag to release Terra, but Thrag dismisses his plea, asserting that heroes do not kill. Mark defies expectations by swiftly ending Onan's life, enraging Thrag, who retaliates by tearing Mark in half. Ursal returns, inflicting severe injuries on Eve and breaking her jaw, with Thrag instructing his daughter to let them suffer. As the two villains depart, Eve's latent powers are unleashed, allowing her to heal both herself and Mark. Confronted with Oliver's lifeless form, Mark reevaluates his stance and expresses a newfound determination to vanquish Thrag once and for all, a sentiment shared by Eve. The following day, Oliver's funeral takes place, leading Mark to unleash his anger on Alan, blaming him for Oliver's death, as it was Alan who advised Oliver to collaborate with Thrag as a double agent. The altercation escalates until Eve intervenes, halting the conflict. Reminding Mark of his recklessness, she employs her powers against him. After the dust settles, Mark and Eve resolve to kill Thrag. They decide to solidify their commitment by getting married. Following the ceremony, Mark and Eve temporarily remove their wedding rings, vowing to wear them again only after they have succeeded in bringing an end to Thrag. The following day, Alan visits Mark's home and openly admits his responsibility for Oliver's death, acknowledging that he pressured Oliver and made sure Thrag was aware of Mark and his family's whereabouts. Eve, overwhelmed by anger, attacks Alan, but Mark intervenes, urging her to stop. Despite the revelation, Mark assures Alan that he and Eve will stand by him in the fight against Thrag. However, Alan grimly reveals that Thrag's forces have grown and now outnumber their own. Alan advises Mark to seek assistance from Nolan and other pure-blooded Viltrumites on Earth. Mark approaches his father, but Nolan refuses, unwilling to jeopardize the lives of the remaining Viltrumites. He blames himself for letting Thrag live initially, not willing to risk the future of his people. Mark and Eve, preparing for the impending battle, are dissatisfied with their new costumes. Eve uses her powers to revert to their old superhero outfits. They spend their last night with their daughter, uncertain of when they'll see her again. Debbie reassures them that she will take care of their daughter. As they prepare to depart, they are joined by Alan, Omni-Man, Space Racer, Thresher, and their military forces. Alan outlines his plan to liberate worlds from the Viltrum Empire one by one. However, Mark proposes an alternative plan, launching an attack on a planet under Thrag's rule. They successfully take over the planet by defeating Thrag's children. Allowing one of his children to escape, Space Racer pursues to determine Thrag's exact location. Despite Alan's hesitation, Mark and Eve assert their readiness, emphasizing the greater stakes at hand. This unexpected resolve surprises Alan. Soon, Space Racer provides Thrag's base location, prompting Mark and Alan, along with their entire army, to converge on the site. Soon, Thrag makes a dramatic appearance, expressing his admiration for Mark's efforts. He commands his vast army of Viltrumite children to attack and bring him the heads of Mark and his allies. Mark and Alan are taken aback by the overwhelming number of Thrag's forces, numbering in the thousands. Mark, although individually stronger, is quickly overwhelmed by their sheer quantity. Many of Thrag's children perish after a single encounter with Mark, but their overwhelming numbers pose a significant advantage. Alan's forces are easily dismantled, leaving only a handful remaining. Mark, witnessing Eve in battle, is gripped with fear at the thought of losing her. He intervenes to rescue Eve before regrouping with Alan and Omni-Man. The trio retreats from the defeated planet, losing the majority of their forces. In the spaceship, they learn that Thrag and his forces are in pursuit. Mark reveals that leading Thrag to Earth was part of his plan, intending to use Earth itself as a stronghold. Omni-Man gathers all the Viltrumites on Earth, informing them of Thrag's impending attack and urging them to prepare for battle. Mark confers with Omni-Man, acknowledging that he forced the involvement of the Viltrumites, but asserting that it will give them an advantage. Their conversation is interrupted when Anissa is brought into the discussion. Omni-Man questions what happened between Mark and Anissa, surprising Mark with his knowledge. Omni-Man explains the Viltrumite customs, but he emphasizes that Anissa has changed after living on Earth. Mark contends with Eve, who wants to join the battle. Mark insists that she cannot fight in space, but assures her that she can join if the battle moves to Earth. He then joins Alan, who informs him that the Viltrumites are closing in. Mark questions their proximity to the sun, and Alan reveals it's to conceal their Viltrumite forces from Earth. The battle ensues, with Thrag and his forces attacking. Omni-Man engages Thrag while Mark confronts his children. Thrag gains the upper hand against Omni-Man, causing Mark great concern. Thrag is on the verge of delivering a fatal blow when Mark intervenes. Thrag retaliates by impaling Omni-Man's heart with his arm. Witnessing his father in dire straits, Mark loses control, unleashing a powerful strike that dispatches many of Thrag's children. The fight between Mark and Thrag intensifies, but their confrontation is abruptly interrupted by the arrival of Robot in a space shuttle from Earth. Robot emphasizes the need for cooperation despite their differences when aligned interests are at stake. Robot transforms into a colossal robot, joining the fray against Thrag's forces. Mark confronts Thrag, accusing him of madness and asserting that his actions will lead to the downfall of the Viltrumites. Thrag, admitting he abandoned the idea of restoring Viltrum, explains that the betrayal by pure-blooded Viltrumites led him to create an endless supply of hybrid children. Thrag callously grabs his hybrid children, using them as weapons against Mark. Despite each child being obliterated with a single strike, Thrag remains indifferent, viewing them as expendable. Mark vows to prevent further deaths of Thrag's children, seizing Thrag and pushing him onto the sun's surface. Stripped of their clothes by the intense heat, Mark and Thrag engage in a fierce battle. Mark questions Thrag's motives as he has given up on restoring the Viltrum Empire. Thrag reveals that his actions are driven by revenge, feeling betrayed by those like Mark and Nolan who now rule the Empire. Thrag attempts to escape to target Mark's allies, but Mark tackles him, plunging them further into the sun. The escalating heat burns away their skin as they continue their prolonged battle. In the intense confrontation, Mark gains the upper hand just as one of Robot's armors arrives, attaching itself to Mark. The armor provides temporary protection from the scorching heat, granting Mark a brief respite while Thrag continues to burn. The brutal clash unfolds with Mark determined to put an end to Thrag's vengeful rampage. As the battle intensifies with the sun's explosions creating a chaotic backdrop, the molten lava melts the robot armor that once protected Invincible. The combatants find themselves dangerously close to the sun, their bodies becoming increasingly unrecognizable in the relentless heat. In the final moments of the fierce confrontation, Thrag, battered and desperate, breaks both of Mark's arms in a fit of rage. However, Mark thinks quickly and ultimately vanquishes Thrag by tearing out his throat with his teeth. Fully prepared to embrace his own demise, Mark is unexpectedly rescued by Alan, who carries him to safety. Thrag's lifeless body is left behind, consumed by the unforgiving sun. Mark's own body appears as a burned core, a testament to the grueling battle he endured. Eve, witnessing Mark's condition, sheds tears as he is taken for treatment. After a significant recovery, Mark awakens and goes to see his father, Omni-Man, who is gravely injured. Omni-Man reveals that he managed to evade Thrag's fatal blow, but his damaged heart leaves him with little time. He entrusts Mark with the responsibility of leading the Viltrumites. urging him to teach them compassion and guide them towards positive change. Mark expresses his desire for them to be happy together in their leadership role, only to realize that Omni-Man has passed away. Overwhelmed with grief, Mark, Debbie, and Tara mourn Nolan's death. As Mark makes a full recovery, he confides in Eve about his mother's struggle to cope with Nolan's demise. The conversation shifts to the prospect of Mark leading the Viltrumites. Initially hesitant, Eve is eventually persuaded by Mark's conviction. When Mark goes to see his daughter, Eve urgently interrupts, revealing that Robot has kidnapped the children of all pure-blooded Viltrumites. Robot's misguided belief that Mark will retaliate after assuming leadership prompts this drastic action, setting the stage for new challenges and conflicts in the aftermath of the intense battle. Mark returns to Earth where the pure-blooded Viltrumites launch an attack on Alan. Witnessing the chaos, Eve seeks help from Thrag's daughter and enlists her assistance. Simultaneously, Mark approaches Immortal for aid. Initially perplexed, Immortal becomes fully informed about the situation and decides to join Mark in his cause. Mark then rallies the surviving superheroes under Rex's rule, urging them to unite against Rex. With his allies assembled, Mark leads an assault on Robot's base, and Britt expresses optimism about their chances of victory. As the battle unfolds, the pure-blooded Viltrumites confront Mark, hindered by the knowledge that Rex holds their children hostage. Mark takes advantage of the situation, instructing Craig to pretend to fight while ensuring no harm is inflicted. The conflict continues, and Mark actively searches for Rex. Along the way, he enlists Tech Jacket and Eve to locate the Viltrumite children. Despite facing formidable resistance from Robot's forces, Thrag's daughter comes to Mark's aid, pledging her allegiance to him. Mark instructs her to prioritize survival for herself and her people. Following Monster Girl's revelation of Rex's location, Mark swiftly heads there and confronts Rex. A conversation unfolds in space between Mark and Rex, culminating in Mark deciding to end Rex's life by impaling his chest. In the aftermath, Mark meets with Immortal and proposes that Immortal takes Rex's place to work towards making the world a better place. Mark reveals Rex's brain in a container, capable of communication, as a tool to assist Immortal in his efforts. Mark's decision reflects a complex mix of resolution and strategic thinking as he seeks to shape a more positive future. Mark's life takes a surprising turn as he meets Anissa's husband, a black man, and discovers Anissa's son, Marky, who bears a striking resemblance to him. Over 2 weeks of getting acquainted with his newfound family, a ceremony is held, and Mark ascends to become the new emperor of the Viltrumites. Mark then visits his mother, who is at his father's grave, and they share a heartfelt conversation. Afterward, Mark heads to the Viltrumite base on the moon, where he talks with Alan. Despite Alan's gratitude, Mark acknowledges that their friendship can never fully return to its pre-Oliver's death state. Alan accepts responsibility for the mistake and decides to leave. Before departing, he asks if he can rely on Viltrumites and Mark for help in the future. Mark pledges assistance as long as it doesn't endanger the Viltrumites and aligns with a just cause. That night, Mark receives a call from Immortal, alerting him to a situation that requires his personal attention. Mark and Eve return to Earth, where Eve confronts Mark about not reaching out to his son, Marky. They encounter a scared and crying Marky, whose Viltrumite powers have just manifested, overwhelming and shocking him. Mark takes Marky into the sky, revealing himself as the boy's father. Marky, shocked, faints, and Eve catches him, bringing him to the Pentagon. Descending, Mark encounters the Mauler twins, initially suspecting wrongdoing. However, the twins reveal they are assisting in the cleanup, emphasizing their resources and lack of motivation to engage in unlawful activities. The unexpected collaboration suggests a new dynamic, raising questions about potential shifts in alliances and the trajectory of Mark's role as the Viltrumite Emperor. Mark, confronted with the potential danger posed by developing Viltrumite children, agrees with Rex's assessment that they are akin to bombs, capable of causing significant harm. Concerned for Earth's safety, Mark decides that it's best for the Viltrumites to leave the planet. Anissa's husband expresses that he and his children won't be joining them. Before departing, Mark has a heartfelt conversation with his son, Marky, revealing the true nature of his heritage as a space alien. Mark provides Marky with insights into Viltrumite history and encourages him to take care of his father while training his superpowers. As Mark, Eve, and the Viltrumites leave Earth, they embark on a journey across various planets. Mark proves to be a capable and benevolent emperor, fostering a positive reputation for the Viltrum Empire. However, the aftermath of Mark's galactic interventions leads to conflict between the Viltrum Empire and the coalition of planets, with Mark emerging victorious. Mark and Alan discuss the changing dynamics, and Mark contends that the coalition is no longer necessary. The war concludes with the Viltrum Empire triumphant, marking a new era in the galaxy. Despite the victory, Mark goes to see Eve, who is in the final stages of her life. However, in a surprising twist, Eve's latent powers unlock, rejuvenating her and granting her a form of immortality. The conclusion of these events sees Mark navigating the complexities of his role as Emperor and dealing with the consequences of his decisions. The newfound immortality of Eve adds an unexpected dimension to their relationships and sets the stage for the continued evolution of the Viltrum Empire and its leadership. Mark's journey across the galaxy takes an unexpected turn when he is attacked by his own son, Marky. Fueled by feelings of abandonment and hatred, Marky confronts Mark, expressing his sense of being unloved in comparison to Terra. Marky struggles with the weight of his emotions, contemplating the idea of having almost killed his own father. In a moment of reconciliation, Mark reassures Marky that they have unlimited time to mend their relationship and resolve the issues between them. This marks a crucial moment in their father-son dynamic, as Mark acknowledges the hurt feelings and seeks to rebuild their connection. On a different planet, Terra engages in a battle against an alien champion and emerges victorious. Despite her success, Terra refuses to take the champion's life, infuriating the alien king. When the king attacks Mark, the sword shatters against him, leading Mark to reveal that all Viltrumites are as strong as he is. The alien king, overwhelmed by fear, seeks forgiveness from Mark, who demonstrates the Viltrumite way by allowing him to go free. Reflecting on these events with Eve, Mark recalls his first fight with his father, specifically the question of what one would have after 500 years. As Mark looks at everything around him, he smiles, hinting at a realization that goes beyond immediate conflicts. This introspective moment suggests that Mark has gained a broader perspective on life, embracing the endurance and potential for positive change that comes with his Viltrumite heritage. The narrative highlights themes of forgiveness, growth, and the enduring nature of relationships, emphasizing Mark's evolving character and the impact of his experiences across the galaxy. Thank you for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. If you have any further questions, or if there's anything else I can assist you with, feel free to reach out. Have a wonderful day.